A lot of leaders and innovators talk about disrupting healthcare. But what does that really mean? And how does one actually do it? On Life-Centered Healthcare, we dive into these questions and more, talking to innovators who are leveraging Clay Christensen's theories to transform our healthcare ecosystem. I'm Ann Somers Hogg, Director of Healthcare at the Clayton Christensen Institute, and I hope these stories help inspire you along your journey to transform health and care. Welcome, listeners. Today, we are going to dive back into the topic of generative AI in healthcare, and we'll tackle how it supports, or hinders, human health. Blake Madden is here today to cover this topic with me. And if you don't know Blake, he's the founder and creator of Hospitalogy, as well as its companion boardroom community. Hospitalogy launched in 2022 and provides the latest insights on healthcare finance, strategy, M&A, and digital health. Prior to Hospitalogy, Blake worked at VMG Health, consulting on a wide range of healthcare service verticals, doing M&A, advisory, and due diligence, along with research and content work. Blake, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks, Ann Somers. I appreciate it. That was a great intro, so appreciate that.
Of course. If you don't follow Blake, last month he wrote an article in response to Thrive Global and OpenAI's launch of an AI health coach. And given the research I've been doing on AI and its role in either advancing or inhibiting health improvement, Blake's piece really struck a chord. I'll include a link to it in the show notes if you'd like to read it. But it reminded me of a recent piece I shared on the topic of AI and its potential to exacerbate our loneliness epidemic. So without further ado, let's dive into the topic of AI and how we might best leverage this innovation to better human health, not to harm it. Can you share the why behind your article on AI health coaches and the humanness of healthcare?
Yeah, absolutely. Ann Somers, really similar to you, honestly. I'm really interested in just kind of AI and loneliness and kind of its impact on community and family and in society at large and those sorts of things. And so I'll say most of the time in Hospitalogy, every now and then I'll put out kind of a more opinion piece or whatever. But most of the time I like to do kind of data-driven research or have theses around research articles and those sorts of things. But this one really struck a chord with me, truly because I just have very strongly held personal beliefs around AI use cases. And specifically in the context of the AI health coach, I read an article co-penned by Sam Altman and Arianna Huffington. I don't know if they actually wrote it, but it says they wrote it, and how they were, investing in a joint venture to create this AI-enabled health coach. And they were really talking a lot, at least I perceived the tone as, hey, we're going to make this AI health coach and we're going to be able to drive a lot of behavior change in people through the technology. And to me, the tone, it came off as very cold and impersonal. And so for me, I was like, I just kind of made a knee-jerk reaction. I was like, this is not how I personally view the future of healthcare. Or behavior change. I view that as something that's in conjunction with environments and, community and true accountability in every sense of the word. I mean, that's what I've personally experienced. And so, that's why I wrote about it. And I just think it's a super interesting topic and very timely.
Great points. I'll build on what you said around the role of the environment and community and accountability. One of the statements you noted in your article was, at its core, healthcare is human and driven by relationships. No amount of AI can ever replace this foundational aspect of our industry. Healthcare is not cold software masquerading as a human, constantly nudging you to make better decisions. So you talked about accountability and community and how these are really critical to helping people lead healthier lives. What are promising offerings in this space that you see in the market today to really serve humans' desires for relationship, accountability, community?
That's a great question. And I'm sure there are more out there, but I'm just going to bring attention to a couple and say why I think that, they're set up for success. And so when you think about frameworks, in my opinion, what can drive behavior change and healthcare is human and driven by relationships. You think about things that have worked really well for people. I bring up Alcoholics Anonymous as kind of an extreme example of this because they have a very, very rigid 12-step or whatever it is system. They have, a sponsor who holds you extremely accountable. And truly, the every sense of the word makes you accountable to your actions. And then also there's a community aspect to where people are come together in a communal fashion and shared experiences. And so when you think about a scalable approach to that from apps or companies, I like to think of companies that are trying to create that or emulate that community and accountability experience. And so just a couple I've come across, I'm sure there's a bunch of them that are attempting it, but Humans Anonymous, just this app where people can kind of share anonymously and you can kind of tier down based on what you're dealing with. Think whether it's, depression or whatever it is, those sorts of things. Or Healthy Gamer was another one where they're trying to appeal to younger generations like Gen Z. In general, we know that Gen Z feels very isolated and, there's rising concerns and behaviorally in that generation and all of the generations, obviously. But there's a couple I, would call out that I've just kind of seen hit my social media or the interwebs, so to speak.
I really like how you pointed to Alcoholics Anonymous. I was not expecting that response, but I think you really tapped into something key there that has for decades driven behavior change. I don't know that this is an answerable question, but I'd love your thoughts on why do you think that model has not scaled to other disease states?
This is speculation. I personally have not been a part of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I'm familiar with their frameworks. I think that it takes a very real sense of vulnerability to join that community and say, I've been in rehab and or I need help and I'm unable to control that within myself because I want to change and because I am addicted and or can't control this. I need the extreme level of support to do these things. That's why I pointed out Alcoholics Anonymous as an extreme example of this, because this is truly, hey, I need to do everything I possibly can to change my habits or drive that behavior.
That makes sense. The example you gave on Humans Anonymous, is it for any type of behavior change or is it specifically behavior change around substance use?
To be honest, I haven't navigated the app a ton. I have it downloaded just to check out. But I think, whether you're dealing with certain issues or whatever it is, I think there's like spaces, kind of like similar to how, a Clubhouse kind of used to be set up, the audio app. You can kind of segment down in the same way. And I think that's really cool because it doesn't necessarily drive community, but it does drive shared experience, which is like a component of that necessity, if that makes sense.
Right. The role of shared experience being the common foundation that's bringing people together.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So based on the importance of accountability and community, how do you think the healthcare system can best direct patients and consumers in a way that leads them to these types of solutions that are more effective in creating behavior change? So I'm not suggesting that we give doctors one more thing to do and that they take on this role of doing more health promotion in the limited amount of time that they have with patients. But how might they ensure patients have better access to these types of solutions, or how do they really direct patients in that way?
I think that's kind of an underrated part of our healthcare system, or not really talked about as much, isn't necessarily like that accountability once that patient leaves the therapist office or the doctor's office to do what has been recommended. Even from a medication standpoint, you can't necessarily track to see if they're adhering to medication or they took this test and got this result. And so let's do this or let's try this. And it's not tracked. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity. I don't know necessarily, legally speaking, how intense you can get with holding patients accountable, if that makes sense. But I do think there are interesting things around. So I talked to Crowd Health's founder, Andy Schubner. They have a kind of very different model to where it's similar to a health plan, but you have to have certain health parameters to join certain crowds, so to speak. And so that's kind of an interesting model I've seen. Again, like, I don't know if that works for everyone. And I don't know if it's like super scalable, but for instance, your whatever metric it is, I'm making this up. This is not actually it. If you need to achieve a resting heart rate of under 60 beats per minute to join this healthy crowd, and then you'll be a part of that. And that's your health plan or whatever. Stuff like that. It's a little on the edges, but it is also interesting as far as holding patients accountable and giving them more agency to, or like even incentive financially to do certain things or change their behaviors. More broadly speaking, there needs to be some sort of mechanism in healthcare, in my opinion, to set up community. And I think there's been a lot of, positive things that have come out from social media as far as, patients of certain disease states finding each other and saying like, hey, this is what's happening to me. Having family support, having caregiver support, those sorts of things are just so important. It all comes back to this theme of community, right? A theme of shared experience. So any way we can do that is a win in my book.
Right. That's a great point. When you were talking about crowd health, I was thinking this sounds a little bit like Patients Like Me 2 or 3.0. So yeah, that opportunity to leverage technology to create community in a way that spurs positive behavior change. And maybe on that note, thinking about more of the upside of AI, while it can't replace human connection, we've talked about before, and you've written a lot about the upside of potential for AI in healthcare. And in this piece, you spoke a little bit about AI's potential to extend physicians. And we see a lot of products on the market that are enhancing provider productivity through ambient charting or providing administrative efficiencies, analyzing data, things like that. And while you note that we shouldn't let it replace the human element of healthcare because that's our greatest strength, there are some potential ways to engage AI in a way that benefits everybody. So what industry guardrails do you think need to be established or considered in order to protect and promote that humanness while providing physicians and other caregivers the tools they need to eliminate the parts of their job that effectively just create burnout? So thinking about the humanness from that aspect too, how do we make healthcare a human service to deliver?
Right. Yeah, no, 100%. And I do want to reiterate the point you made initially that AI has a ton of potential, and I'm like pro AI in healthcare, just, in the right arenas.
Right.
Like, yeah, called out administrative simplification. I really think where we move the needle is, from what I've heard from the beginning, is, hey, let's make this process 20% more efficient. Let's apply this and allow create a clinical decision support tool for nurse practitioners so that they can step in and do more without as much MD supervision. Let's build, tech platforms for every sort of hyper-personalized practice under the sun, whether it's for a nutritionist or a dietitian or whoever. Let's give them all of the tools possible to make them as productive as they want to be, but without replacing them, in my opinion. Because, a patient comes in and they have cancer, or like they're dealing with a chronic condition, like they don't want AI for that, like they might want AI to say, hey, yeah, I did this small follow-up thing, or like, whatever it is, prescription refill. I have no idea. But when it comes to like the core relational aspect of healthcare, like AI cannot replace that. And I don't think it ever should. So I think that should be guardrail number one, is just, hey, never replace the clinician-patient relationship. And I know there are some VCs out there, whoever will say like that's a trade-off with productivity, and we need more productivity in healthcare given the labor shortages and all those sorts of things. But I truly believe AI as a feature and as an extender of current capacity is the best path forward. And there's not even really like a regulatory path forward for AI replacing clinicians in any future that I see, at least while I'm alive, in my opinion.
Can I dig into that one a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Never replacing the clinician-patient relationship with AI. That makes me think of the model 98.6. In, I think, 2015, they launched, and it was a direct-to-consumer play where you could do urgent care via text, but the front end of it was an AI chatbot. They could lower the cost of delivering virtual urgent care because what would have originally taken, let's say, 15 minutes of physician time, they could get it down to 3 because of the AI chatbot on the front end. So you're still interacting with a clinician at some point in the discussion, but a huge portion of the interaction has been outsourced to AI. So in your mind, is that a solution that should exist, or based on guardrail number one, that would be too much replacement of the clinician-patient relationship? Because the last thing I'll say is the model did pretty well.
I think that that's pro AI, like I think that's fantastic because you're kind of like providing that, triage layer in a sense, if that makes sense. But ultimately, like the clinician is still seeing that patient and there's not something being brushed under the rug. Now, I will say in general, like telehealth can't always capture like potential higher acuity possibilities. Its sweet spot is like low acuity stuff, right? But that's kind of like a different conversation from this. Like I think in general, supercharging call centers or like things like that help patient intake on the front end or those sorts of things. That's almost like front desk in a sense, or like it's not necessarily replacing like the clinicians that are doing the healthcare delivery, if that makes sense. So maybe that's the distinction I would draw is like maybe it can really help with like the, call it maybe like medical assistant or tech or front desk type support where there are a ton of shortages and, salaries are like 30 to 40K. So not really sustainable for humans, things of that nature. Yeah, that's speculation, but
no, that makes sense. So you're saying never fully replace the physician-patient interaction or relationship.
I also do think there's a world where, and I don't know about the legal of all this, I'm not a lawyer or anything, but I think there's a world where you can spin up, your one medical app or whatever and say to the AI, whatever companion, hey, I've got a cold. Here's a test. I don't know. Here's proof. Can I have a prescription for Tamiflu? I have flu onset or something like that. I think that there's a world where that can happen without harm, if that makes sense.
That definitely makes sense.
There are ways to boost productivity. You mentioned like 98.6 or, the admin. I think ultimately we'll see AI become essentially like a co-pilot for doctors or a co-pilot for nurse practitioners, even nurses. So use a radiologist as an example as one of the best marquee short-term use cases for machine learning and AI. It's like feed you all these images and the AI can point out certain possible tumors or whatever it is. I'm not a doctor, so I don't know the technical terms, but I think that's the max, in my opinion. For anything that needs that higher acuity human touch, there always needs to be a human in the loop when it comes to just anything medical decision-making wise, beyond things that Hims and Hers is selling online.
And that would be a whole nother discussion. So building on the guardrails, how do we balance the need for human touch? Because I fully agree with you. I think there is a whole segment of patients and consumers and caregivers who have desires for progress and jobs to be done around that in-person touch, around the relationship and things like that. I don't know that it's every segment or every job to be done that people come to healthcare that they have to have that relationship or human touch, but certainly a lot of them. I do wonder, though, how do we balance the need for human touch and the labor shortages that not only we're facing in the industry today, but that will get worse in the future?
This is kind of buzzwordy, but I do think it's leveraging AI and other tech, right, to allow clinicians to practice at the top of their license, right? So it's like, hey, let's triage this stuff and let's find ways to find efficiency improvements while retaining that human touch. So like, the 10% of patients that are high needs, chronic, or have a really intense acute condition or whatever it is, they need the most time, right? So let's develop smart tooling, smart scheduling, whatever it is, to say, hey, this patient might take this much time, et cetera, those sorts of things. I know that's much easier said than done, but I, think it's also potentially possible in an AI-enabled future, right? So just excited from that aspect to see what gets developed and ambient note-taking and all of these things, how they all can kind of come together and provide both a better patient experience, but also a better provider experience.
That makes me think about perhaps the human inclination to see new innovations as panacea to our current problems and thinking about how are we going to leverage AI to solve X instead of how can AI be part of a suite of potential solutions that can help to alleviate labor shortages. I was having a fascinating conversation yesterday with an entrepreneur who has launched a model to leverage lay people who are looking for, I think the way she phrased it was work on the margins. So these are either entrepreneurs who have a few hours a week or oftentimes new moms who aren't looking to go back to full-time work, but maybe just want a few hours of work. But how do you leverage lay people who have the ability to be highly empathetic and connect with people? So create that connection and relationship in order to improve health outcomes. They don't have to have any medical background because, to your point and where we started, a lot of what drives behavior change, which we know improves health, is accountability and human connection. So there's a lot of power in thinking about not just how can we leverage this exciting new technology innovation to solve the problem, but where does this exciting new technology innovation really fit in as a piece of the overall puzzle for how we're going to solve the challenges that we're faced with. So maybe a couple more questions before we wrap up. I'll try to make these quick hits, but I mentioned at the beginning that I had recently written about AI and its potential impact on loneliness. And I'd love to hear what you think. Will AI companions and generative AI as a whole be net positive or net negative to loneliness as a society, or somewhere in the middle?
That's a great question. And I feel like with any complex situation like that, there is some gray. But I personally am of the opinion that it's going to be relatively net negative, just when we're just talking about AI, potential for AI companions in isolation. I just can't help but think of the movie Her, and I haven't seen it. I don't know what happens in it or anything like that, but like him being in love with an AI girlfriend, I mean, that affects the fertility rate. This person is 100% in love with him, at least at the beginning. I don't know how it turns out, but it's like essentially like your yes person, you know? So there's no conflict. There's no ability to like enhance emotional intelligence or like grow as a person. Those sorts of things I think are very harmful and just leads to more mental health concerns. You're not engaging with real humans. So it's very, in my opinion, dystopian and problematic. You know, maybe there's some world where AI companions interact in a community with humans and other humans interact, or I don't know, something like that. That could be good. But overall, I think there are also some good traits too. Like for instance, you know, if you're going through a hard time, and maybe someday, maybe even today, you can use the AI as a sounding board, as a sort of like extension of a therapist. Mm-hmm. You know, you're afraid to tell a human something you think is really serious or really, you know, you would never say this to someone else because, you know, you're scared about the ramifications or whatever it is. I think could be really good from that aspect. Again, I don't know what the ultimate conclusion is, but in general, I'm just really worried about, you know, especially as Gen Zers and screen times and the anxious generation, you know, and all of that culminating into this kind of singularity of AI co-pilots and agents and companions. I'm very concerned about this kind of incoming onslaught of hyper-personalization because I think that many people will opt to dissociate rather than engage with other humans in that future.
It's kind of an unfair question because I asked this broad sweeping question where the answer is really context dependent, right? And you gave a couple of different examples where it could be net positive or net negative. And I think in the situations where you talked about where it could really be net positive, I completely agree. And I think most of my concern revolves around the replacement of the human relationship, especially in adolescence as social skills are building. And you pointed to the anxious generation. If listeners aren't familiar with that, it's a recent book by social psychologist Jonathan Haidt on the impact of smartphones and specifically social media on developing adolescent brains. And one of the questions top of mind for me when I was thinking about the interaction between generative AI and loneliness was with smartphones and social media, we didn't know what we didn't know, but now we know. So it used to be an unknown, and now it's a known. So how will we create different guardrails in order to protect mental health outcomes? I think is something that I have a lot of questions about, and I'm really hoping that either as a nation or as a society or as an industry, we figure out before it's too late. So my last question for you, is there anything you wish I'd asked you that I didn't? And if so, what's the question and what's the answer?
First of all, I would love to piggyback on your last comment because I think it's so good. And I actually do you think you're seeing some movement back toward traditional adolescent relationships and those sorts of things? I've seen multiple reports coming out recently of schools banning phones again and having very stringent penalties in place. And I think that's great for development. And the teachers are saying, oh, the kids are talking to each other again, and stuff like that, versus talking to their AI agent at home or their whatever Instagram following they have or those sorts of things. But back to just kind of, any questions I'd wish you asked. I really just want to reiterate that point around behavior change and just truly for anybody in any habits you form, we've all read Atomic Habits and we've all tried to do behavior change and go to the gym and New Year's and all that kind of stuff. It truly is very difficult, especially for somebody with addiction or just in general, if you're wanting lifestyle change, it is difficult. And there's a ton of inertia. I do think that there is a lot of promise for an AI app or something to come in and, nudge appropriately. I have a friend who has an app where he could not wake up in the morning. He would sleep in till 10 or whatever. And then he downloaded this app to where the alarm would literally not go off until he took a picture of his front door. And so stuff like that is actually very impactful, And so if there are things we can do to drive change like that, and now he wakes up at 7 a.m. or whatever it is, that's pretty cool. There is potential. So I'm excited about that. But I am also just concerned about, the future of AI and in a world where consumption and overconsumption is the norm currently. So that is what I will leave you with, Ann Somers. I hope that overall, I'm positive, but there are some real concerns to address also.
No, Blake, that was great. And that is hilarious that the alarm doesn't go off till he takes a picture of the front door, but it obviously gets him out of bed. So that was a great solution.
I need to download that too, maybe. We'll see.
Blake, thank you so much. Thank you for not only the detailed data analysis and insights that you provide on the industry, but also for sharing your perspectives on AI as well. And if I had to recap what we talked about here, it would be healthcare is human first and its solutions should be too. And human first doesn't mean human only, but when we think about how to best leverage AI in support of making health outcomes better, we should think about how do we support the humans, not replace them. That's both supporting the providers who are providing the care and supporting the individuals who are receiving it. So healthcare is human first. Its solutions should be too, but human first doesn't mean human only. So thank you, Blake. It was awesome as always to chat with you, and I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks so much for the time. It was a great conversation.
Thank you for listening to Life-Centered Healthcare. If you like what you heard, please leave a review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. And for more of the latest in healthcare, check out our website, christenseninstitute.org. You can sign up for our newsletter and read our latest industry insights. Until next time, have a wonderful day, everyone.